I want to go a little bit more into your background, just as far as like, what do you think it was about yourself that made you so passionate about having these principles for your family and then, letting them grow out to other people?
It's when I think back, as I mentioned, I've always had this interest in personal development. So it starts there for me. Um, and I've just always been intrigued by it. You may be the same way. I've read tons of books. And if there was somebody coming to town and they were having a workshop, I was the guy that would go to it, just around personal development. And and then what happens is you start to see opportunities to coach. And I've been through all the programs for like coaching as well. Technically, I'm a certified life coach, so I was intrigued by that just by a process. How do you engage and support and help other people to grow and develop as well? And so, just the whole process of coaching became very interesting to me. And as a parent, that's what we're doing a lot of. Where especially as they move into those teen years, and actually, one of my messages to parents with teens is to make the transition. When they're young, parents tend to control everything that happens. You think about, you got a 3-year-old, you decide, what clothes they wear, when they eat, what they eat, when they go to bed. I mean, you're in charge, right? But
Yep.
as they move into those teenage years, there needs to be this natural transition to where you turn some of that control over to the child and let them start to manage their life a little bit more. And a lot of times, what parents struggle with is they say, well, what do I do then? If I turn over control, what's my role going to be? And that's where the idea of empowerment or the idea of being a coach starts to play into it. And so, that parent's starting to look at themselves more in a coaching role as opposed to the manager and the one in control. And I went through that as well. So, it all started for me in that personal development arena. And it's just something I've always been intrigued with for myself. But then also, how do I help my kids, grow and develop and be the best versions of themselves as well?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I love that. Something that's coming to mind as you say all that is that idea that as parents, when we do start to let go of control, I think some of the things that we are confronted by, perfectionism is definitely one of those things. At least it has been for me, right? Looking at like, well, what if they do make that mistake, or how big of a mistake can we afford for them to make, or that feeling like it needs to look a certain way. Like, how do you help people manage those expectations and deal with that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a great question because that does come up for parents a lot of times. They feel like the child is a reflection on them and their, kind of their effectiveness, if you will, as a parent. And I just encourage parents to think in terms of the journey. Again, it's this premise that we're all growing and learning and developing, and as part of that, you're going to have circumstances and times where things don't go the way you'd like for them to go. And the question is, what do you learn from that? Or how can you take that experience and grow and learn and develop from it as a parent? But then also, how can your child grow and learn and develop? And one of the things that happens is a lot of times parents will they'll jump in and want to rescue the child if they have an issue. And I always encourage them to resist that urge to rescue, because that going through that struggle is part of how that teenager grows and learns, and they develop resiliency. And that's something that we want them to have when they become an adult and they go off into the world. The idea of them being able to be resilient. And the other word I like is resourcefulness. The child has to learn to be resourceful. Can they solve their own problems? And then do they have the staying power, if you will, to get through a difficult time? And what's so powerful about that is if they do that some, it just does wonders for them and their self-confidence, and they believe, oh, I can get through this, I can make it through. Whereas if the parent always rescues them, the underlying message to the child is, you can't do it, right? Or you aren't capable, I
Absolutely.
don't believe you can do it. And so letting them go through that, you're sending the message that, oh, I believe you can handle this, you'll be okay. And you're also letting them develop that ability to solve problems and be resilient. So it's, sometimes the biggest lessons are when things get messy, right?
Amen.
um, and that's where, so you just got to be able to let go of that and just look for opportunities to grow. And it's the other, you may have heard this idea that, think in terms of life happening for you, not happening to you. Everything that happens is it's happening for you. It's the next thing you need to have to grow and learn. Um, I got a great example from our journey as parents as well. So I have two sons. The younger of the two sons, I think he's like 17 years old. He's got his driver's license. He ends up at a stoplight, and one of his buddies is beside him. So you can see where this is going, right? There's two of them sitting at a stoplight, side by side, two different cars. They decide they're going to kind of drag race away from the stoplight. Well, unbeknownst to them, there was an undercover cop right behind him in a car. So he ends up with a reckless driving, speeding, all this stuff that it was a mess that he got himself into. Um, but it was one of his greatest opportunities to say, okay, I can solve this problem. And he ended up, he ended up in court paying for an attorney, and, just all kinds of stuff that happened as a result of that bad decision. But it also helped him to feel comfortable and confident that he can solve problems at the same time, by letting him go through that. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so hard as a parent not to say, like, I'm going to step in and come to court and pay your fines. And, oh, like, it's a different
yeah,
experience as we watch them struggle. And it's one of the hardest things as a parent to do. And yet I would agree with you now, having, 22 and 21 and starting to, they say little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems.
right,
And yet you kind of shift that, because what I've realized is the hardest things I've gone through with my kids, one, I'm so humbled that they will call when there's a problem. Two, that's when I've seen them become a better version of themselves and understand how amazing they are, not because there was the problem, but because they were able to come through it.
right,
And
and to solve it.
and yet it doesn't solve overnight. So you have to sit there, you lay there with that, how do you find the peace in those moments to know. I love, one of my friends says, if it's not okay, you're not there yet. If it's not okay, we haven't gotten there yet, right? I mean, that concept that, like, you're coming through it and it takes some time, and
Right,
not everything gets solved in one moment. So you
right.
have to sit with the uncomfortable, and that's not
Yep,
easy.
yep, and as a parent, you have to let them go through it too, and that can be a struggle, and that's where, and one of my messages to parents is the idea of having a love-based mindset, or being, love-centered.